The viewing deck of the celestial torrent smelled of ozone and crushed lavender, a scent engineered to mask the metallic tang of the atmosphere regulators. Princess Zereya of the Vayari Dominion stood at the edge of the trans-glass partition, her reflection a ghostly overlay on the desolation below. At 22 cycles, she was the jewel of the high court, draped in silks that shimmered like spilled mercury, her skin the color of polished moonlight, her eyes a piercing violet that unnerved the warlords who bowed at her feet. She was perfect. She was poised, and she was bored out of her mind. Behind her, the court buzzed with the vacuous energy of predators anticipating a meal. Generals in ceremonial armor clinked glasses of nectar, laughing with mouths too wide, their teeth filed to points. Diplomats whispered behind fans made of avian feathers, trading secrets that would destroy minor houses by morning. Zereya hated them all, did them. Beneath the heavy jeweled collar that chafed her throat, she felt the familiar cold ache of isolation. She had been trained in 12 forms of martial combat, 4 dialects of galactic diplomacy, and the precise art of ordering an orbital bombardment. Yet she had no one to speak to who did not want something from her. Today was supposed to be a spectacle, a piece of theater. "Your Highness," General Kale purred, stepping up beside her. He was a large Vayari, his skin mottled with the gray scales of the southern brood, his chest puffed out to display a rack of medals won in skirmishes that history had already forgotten. "We are arriving at the coordinates. The visuals should be cleared shortly." Zereya did not turn. She kept her gaze fixed on the rust-colored clouds swirling below the floating palace ship. "Is this truly necessary, General? Bringing the royal court halfway across the sector to stomp on a nest of insects?" Kale chuckled, a wet, grinding sound. "Not insects, Highness, Terrans. The last cell in this quadrant. Intelligence suggests they have been scavenging old tech, trying to build a transmitter. We cannot have the galaxy thinking the Dominion tolerates static." "Terrans," Zereya said, testing the word. It felt ancient. "I thought we extinguished them 60 years ago." "We broke them," Kyle corrected, sipping his nectar. "We shattered their fleets, burned their cradle world, and scattered the survivors like dust. But dust has a way of accumulating in the corners. Today, we swept it out. It will be a fine show. The Sun Shatter Battalion is deployed." Zereya looked down as the clouds parted. Below, on the cracked, dry mud of the silt flats, the Vayari military machine was arrayed in all its terrifying glory. 3,000 soldiers in gleaming white kinetic armor stood in perfect phalanxes. Hover tanks with plasma cannons hummed just above the ground, kicking up dust devils. Above them, a swarm of hunter-seeker drones buzzed like a plague of locusts, their optical sensors glowing red. It was enough firepower to level a city. "And the opposition?" Zereya asked. Kale pointed a clawed finger. "There." Zereya squinted, at the far end of the valley miles away from the gleaming white wall of the Vayari army. There was a distortion in the heat haze. A single drop pod, barely held together by friction burns and prayer, had slammed into the mud. It was not a Vayari craft. It was blocky, ugly, and devoid of grace. As she watched, the pod's heavy iron ramp slammed down into the muck. The court went silent, then erupted into tittering laughter. Rolling out of the darkness of the pod was not a sleek assault vehicle or a platoon of cybernetic rebels. It was a tank, but not a tank like the Vayari knew. It was a box on treads, a primitive, hulking beast of iron and combustion. It was the color of dried blood and tetanus. Rust flaked off its sides in sheets as it lurched forward, its engine coughing a cloud of thick black smoke that stained the pristine air. One of its tracks squealed with a rhythmic, agonizing shriek, clank, shriek, clank, shriek that echoed across the valley. It looked less like a weapon of war and more like a corpse that had forgotten to lie down. "By the void," a diplomat gasped, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. Is that coal-powered? Look at the barrel, it is welded on." General Kale was shaking his head, a grin splitting his face. "A museum piece, a mark for Siegebreaker, Terran design, pre-contact era. It belongs in a scrap heap, not a battlefield. They insult us by dying in such garbage." Zereya did not laugh. She leaned closer to the glass, her breath fogging the surface. The tank was alone. There was no infantry support, no air cover, just that singular, miserable machine trundling forward to meet an army that could vaporize it from orbit. "Who is driving it?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" Kale scoffed. "Some fanatic with a death wish. Gunners, prepare the heavy lasers. Let us melt it into slag and go home for dinner." Inside the iron belly of the beast, the air was hot enough to cook meat. It smelled of hydraulic fluid, old sweat, and the copper tang of recycled oxygen. The interior was not digital and sleek like the Veyari ships. It was analog, cramped, and sharp. Levers, manual cranks, and physical toggle switches lined the walls, many of them bypassed with jury-rigged wiring that hung like black vines. Ash Weller sat in the commander's harness, the leather cracked and peeling. He was a landscape of ruin. His face was a map of scars, pale lines running through grizzled stubble that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. His eyes were deep-set, the color of flint, staring at a periscope monitor that flickered with static. He wore a tank top stained with grease, revealing arms mapped with burn marks and shrapnel wounds that had healed badly. Around his neck hung a cluster of dog tags, not one or two, but dozens. They were fused together by heat and time, a heavy jingling collar of the dead. When he moved, they clicked, a sound like dry bones rattling. He did not speak. He hadn't spoken a meaningful sentence to another living soul in 4 years. His hands, wrapped in dirty bandages, rested lightly on the control yokes. He wasn't piloting the tank with the sticks, though. At the base of his skull, a neural jack, an ugly invasive port drilled into the bone, glowed with a faint, sickly amber light. A thick cable ran from his neck into the mainframe of the tank. The Veyari thought this machine was a relic. They saw the rust. They saw the tracks. They didn't see the core. They didn't know that beneath the iron hull, Ash had buried the stolen heart of a hyperdimensional drive, rigged not to travel, but to channel. He closed his eyes. The neural interface screamed as it connected. He didn't feel the heat of the cabin anymore. He felt the treads grinding into the mud as if they were his own feet. He felt the rotation of the turret as if he were turning his head. Targeting. The machine whispered into his brain. It wasn't an AI. It was simpler than that. It was an echo. On the screen, the Veyari army was a sea of white pixels, 3,000 targets. Ash breathed out. He reached up and touched the dog tags at his throat. "All right," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Let's show them." On the celestial torrent, General Kale raised his hand. "Fire a warning shot, just to see if it falls apart." A single Veyari hover tank rotated its cannon. A bolt of blue plasma shrieked across the distance, superheating the air. It struck the rusted front armor of the Terran tank. Explosion. Smoke. The court clapped politely, but when the smoke cleared, the tank was still moving. The rust was scorched black, but the armor hadn't buckled. The squealing track hadn't stopped. Clank, shriek, clank, shriek. "Missed the vital spots," Kale muttered, annoyed. "All units, open fire, erase it." The valley erupted. Hundreds of plasma cannons fired in unison. The air turned into a blinding, strobing nightmare of neon blue destruction. The ground around the Terran tank churned into molten glass. The noise was deafening, a continuous thunder that rattled the wine glasses on the princess's observation deck. Zerea flinched, her hand going to the glass. It was overkill. It was grotesque. "Stop," she murmured, though no one heard her. "It's dead. Stop it." The barrage lasted for a full minute. When the guns finally fell silent, the cloud of dust and steam was a mile wide. "Target neutralized," a technician announced boredly. "Good," Kyle said, turning away. "Set course for—" "Sir," the technician's voice cracked. "Energy spike. Massive energy spike detected." Kale spun back around. "What? From where?" "From the center of the blast zone." Down in the valley, the cloud of dust began to swirl, and it didn't drift away. It was sucked inward, as if a vacuum had opened. At the center of the crater, the rusted tank sat motionless. It was glowing, not with fire, with a dark purple energy that seemed to crack the air around it. The rust on its hull seemed to bleed light. The barrel of the main cannon, a long serrated tube of black iron, began to hum. Inside, Ash's eyes were rolled back in his head. The neural link was burning him, feeding off his adrenaline, his memories, his absolute refusal to die. The tank wasn't powered by a reactor. It was powered by the psychic resonance of the pilot, amplified through the stolen tech. And Ash Weller had a lot of grief to burn. "Lock," the machine whispered. "Lock, lock, lock." The turret snapped to the right with impossible speed. Boom! It wasn't a laser. It was a solid slug, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, encased in a disruption field. The Vayari command tank on the far right of the formation didn't explode. It simply disintegrated. One moment it was there. The next it was a mist of metallic confetti and red vapor. Zerea gasped. "Shields!" Kyle screamed into his comms. "Raise the hard light shields." A shimmering dome of energy snapped into place over the Vayari army. The rusted tank fired again. Boom! The shell hit the shield. By all laws of physics, it should have bounced off. Instead, the shell shattered the hard light construct like a hammer hitting a pane of frozen glass. The feedback loop fried the generators of 50 nearby hover tanks, causing them to drop out of the air and crash into the mud. "That is not possible," Kyle roared. "That is kinetic weaponry. It cannot pierce shielding." The rusted tank began to move. It didn't trundle anymore. It surged. The engine roared with a sound that was half mechanical, half predatory. It accelerated toward the Vayari lines, moving faster than a tracked vehicle had any right to move. The Vayari returned fire. Plasma washed over the human tank, but the purple aura around it seemed to eat the energy, absorbing the heat. Ash was screaming in the cockpit, his hands gripping the yoke so hard his knuckles bled. "Come on," he yelled at the ghosts in his head. "Is that all you got?" The tank plowed into the front line of the Vayari infantry. It didn't slow down. It crushed the pristine white armor under its treads, the squeal of the metal drowning out the screams. The coaxial machine guns on the turret spun up, unleashing a torrent of heavy-caliber rounds that tore through the sophisticated alien composites like paper. The Vayari panicked. They were used to fighting long-range, clean wars. They were not used to a monster that wanted to be close enough to touch them. The drone swarm descended, thousands of them diving like angry wasps. The tank's hull opened small ports, releasing canisters. They exploded in the air, not flak, but magnetic chaff mixed with something else, interference. The drones seized up, their logic centers scrambled by the sheer density of the electronic hate radiating from the tank. They fell from the sky, raining down on their own troops, exploding on impact. "Pull back!" Kyle was screaming now, his composure gone. "Air support! Bring the cruisers down! Vaporize the grid square!" Two massive Vayari war cruisers descended from the clouds, their shadows casting long darkness over the slaughter. They charged their ventral cannons, preparing to turn the entire valley into a crater. Inside the tank, Ash saw the shadows. He gritted his teeth, blood trickling from his nose. "Up!" he commanded. The main cannon of the tank elevated to a vertical angle. The mechanics groaned. "Burn!" Ash whispered. The tank fired. The shell didn't travel in a straight line. It curved, tracing a jagged arc of purple lightning. It struck the underbelly of the first cruiser. The impact didn't just puncture the hull. It triggered a chain reaction in the cruiser's gravity drive. The massive ship groaned, the sound vibrating in Zaraya's chest bones. Then, gravity inverted. The cruiser crumpled in on itself, imploding into a sphere of crushed metal and fire before plummeting into the second cruiser. The collision was apocalyptic. A shockwave of fire swept across the Vayari rear lines, incinerating the generals who had been laughing 10 minutes ago. Zaraya stood frozen at the window. The glass was vibrating. The sky, which had been a pale, bored blue, was now choked with black smoke and the orange violence of burning fuel. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the ruin. The Vayari army was broken. The soldiers who hadn't been crushed or shot were throwing down their weapons and fleeing into the wastes. The pristine white phalanxes were gone, replaced by a graveyard of burning metal. And in the center of it all, the rusted tank sat amidst a pile of wreckage, its barrel smoking, its engine idling with a low, dangerous growl. General Kale was on his knees, staring at the screens, his face the color of ash. We are the Dominion," he whispered. "We are gods." "No," Zaraya said, her voice cutting through the panic on the bridge. She wasn't looking at Kale. She was looking at the tank. "We were arrogant." She turned to her personal guard, the elite Praetorians. "Prepare my shuttle." "Highness?" the captain of the guard asked, alarmed. "The zone is hot. That machine is dangerous." "That machine has stopped firing," Zaraya said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I want to see the face of the thing that just killed an army." The descent was turbulent. Zaraya's shuttle landed 500 yards from the tank, kicking up a spray of bloody mud. She stepped out, ignoring the protests of her guards. The air was thick with the smell of cooked ozone and copper. She walked toward the tank. Up close, it was even more terrifying when it was huge, a mountain of scarred iron. The heat radiating from it was intense enough to curl the edges of her silk gown. She stopped 10 paces away. Her guards leveled their pulse rifles at the machine. "Hold fire," she ordered. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind howled through the wreckage of the Vayari cruisers. Then, with a metallic groan of protesting hydraulics, the commander's hatch on top of the turret cracked open. Zaraya held her breath. She expected a monster, a cyborg, a raving lunatic. A hand gripped the rim of the hatch. It was a human hand, wrapped in dirty, blood-stained bandages. Ash Weller pulled himself up. He sat on the edge of the hatch, his legs dangling inside. He looked exhausted. He pulled the neural jack from his neck with a wet click and winced, rubbing the spot. He reached into the pocket of his grease-stained pants and pulled out a crumpled packet of tobacco, putting a stick between his lips, though he didn't light it. He looked at the destruction around him, the burning ships, the dead soldiers, the shattered drones with eyes that looked like they had seen it all 1,000 times before. Then he looked at Zaraya. He didn't bow. He didn't look impressed by her floating palace or her royal silks. He looked at her the way a man looks at a storm cloud, inevitable and annoying. Zaraya stepped forward, her boots sinking into the mud. She tried to summon the voice of the princess, the voice that commanded star systems. I am Princess Zereya of House Veyari, she announced, though her voice trembled slightly. You have destroyed a battalion of the Dominion's finest. You have engaged in an act of war. Ash just stared at her. The wind ruffled his hair. The dog tags around his neck clicked softly. Who are you? Zereya demanded, her composure slipping. What is that machine? How did it do this? Ash took the unlit tobacco stick out of his mouth. His voice was rough, like two stones grinding together, unused and dry. It's a tank, he said. That is not a tank, Zereya said, gesturing to the burning cruiser. Tanks do not kill starships. What kind of technology is this? Who gave it to you? Ash slid down the front of the armor, his boots hitting the mud with a heavy thud. He stood a head taller than her. He smelled of oil and old blood. He walked toward her, and her guards tensed, fingers on triggers. Ash ignored them. He stopped right in front of her, close enough that she could see the jagged scar running down his cheek, close enough to see the gray flecks in his flinty eyes. He wasn't afraid. That was what shook her most. He was standing in front of the heir to the galaxy, surrounded by guns, and he looked simply tired. You think the machine did this? Ash asked quietly. I saw it, Zereya said. It wiped us out by dusk. Ash shook his head slowly. He looked past her toward the horizon where the sun was dipping below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. The machine is just metal. Princess, Ash said. He looked back at her, and for a second, Zereya saw an abyss of sadness so deep it made her vertigo spin. It's not the tank they should fear. He tapped the side of his own head, right over the temple. It's the memory, he whispered. Before Zereya could ask what he meant, the exhaustion finally overtook him. Ash swayed, his eyes rolling back, and he collapsed forward. Zereya gasped, catching him instinctively, her silk robes instantly staining with the grease and filth of his uniform. He was heavy, a dead weight in her arms, burning with fever. Highness! The guards rushed forward to pull him off her. Stand back! Zereya snapped, her voice ringing out with sudden ferocity. She looked down at the unconscious man in her arms, at the broken dog tags resting against the fine embroidery of her dress. She looked at the rusted tank that loomed over them, silent now, but radiating a watchful, predatory heat. Take him to the shuttle, Zereya ordered, her voice low. Do not harm him, and bring the machine. If anyone touches it without my permission, execute them. Highness, the captain stammered. Where are we taking him? The dungeon? Zereya looked at Ash's face, at the lines of pain etched into his sleep. She looked at the burning army of her father's dominion. No, she said. Take him to the medical wing. I want him alive. She looked back at the tank one last time as the sun finally vanished, plunging the world into twilight. I want to know what he remembers. The containment block of the High Palace was a cathedral of silence and white light. It was designed not just to imprison the body, but to erase the mind. There were no corners in the cell, only smooth, curving walls of seamless alabaster polymer that hummed with a subsonic frequency meant to induce docility. The light did not come from a fixture, but emanated from the material itself. A shadowless, sterile glare that made it impossible to tell where the floor ended and the wall began. Ash Weller sat in the center of the room on a floating gravity disk that served as a bench. He looked like a jagged tear in the pristine reality of the Veyari court. His boots were caked with the red mud of the battlefield, crumbling onto the immaculate white floor. His gray tank top was stiff with dried sweat and blood. The scars on his arms stood out in stark relief under the harsh lighting, twisted maps of flesh that told stories of fire and shrapnel. He was not pacing. He was not screaming. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped loosely, staring at the blank wall with the terrifying stillness of a predator waiting for the cage door to open. Outside the containment field, Princess Zarea argued with the warden. "It is against the high protocol," the warden hissed, his mandibles clicking in agitation. He was a bureaucrat of the third house, thin and reeking of nervous pheromones. "The prisoner is a biological anomaly. He is to be prepped for vivisection by the science directorate at dawn. No visitors, especially not the heir." Zarea stood tall, her violet eyes flashing with a cold, imperious light. She had shed the heavy ceremonial armor of the viewing deck and now wore a gown of midnight blue silk that flowed like water around her, cinched with a belt of woven platinum. She looked every inch the untouchable royalty she was born to be. "I am not a visitor, warden," Zarea said, her voice low and dangerous. "I am the one who brought him in. I need to verify his tactical value before my father's butchers destroy what could be a weapon. Open the field, or I will have you reassigned to waste reclamation on the outer moons." The warden swallowed hard. He tapped a sequence into the holographic interface. The shimmering energy field that sealed the room dissolved with a soft chime. "I will be monitoring," the warden warned. "Disable the audio," Zarea commanded. "State secrets are not for your ears." She stepped through the threshold before he could protest. The air inside the cell smelled different. It smelled of iron and unwashed humanity, a sharp, pungent contrast to the floral, sterile scent of the corridor. Ash did not look up. Zarea stopped 3 paces from him. Up close, the violence radiating off him was palpable. He was not large in the way Veyari shock troopers were, but he was dense. Every muscle looked coiled, hardened by a gravity heavier than this world's. "You are comfortable, I hope," Zarea said. It was a stupid thing to say. She winced internally. Ash slowly turned his head. His eyes, the color of chipped flint, swept over her. He looked at the silk gown. He looked at the platinum belt. He looked at her face, smooth and unblemished, painted with the silver markings of her station. "Comfortable," Ash repeated. His voice was a ruin, a rasp that sounded like boots crunching on glass. "I am in a light bulb, princess, and I don't have my smokes." "You are alive," Zarea countered, clasping her hands behind her back to hide a tremor she did not understand. "Given what you did to the Sun Shatter Battalion. That is a mercy my father rarely grants." Ash scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "Mercy? Is that what you call waiting to see how the toy works before you take it apart?" "Is it a toy?" Zarea asked, stepping closer. She was fascinated by the necklace of dog tags. There were so many. "The generals say it is impossible. A combustion engine moving at those speeds. Kinetic rounds piercing hard light shields. They say you are a warlock." "I am a mechanic," Ash said. He finally looked her in the eyes. "And your generals are idiots who forgot that physics doesn't care about how expensive your technology is. Mass times acceleration equals force. It doesn't matter if the mass is a rusted slug or a diamond. It hits just as hard." Zarea walked around him, circling the gravity disk. She felt like she was observing a dangerous animal. Something from a brutal epoch her people had evolved past millennia ago. "Why do you wear them?" she asked, gesturing to the tags. Ash's hand went to the metal cluster at his throat. His fingers brushed the dented steel. "They are heavy." "That is not an answer. It is the only one you get." Zarea paused in front of him. Her patience, frayed by the slaughter she had witnessed and the adrenaline of the day, snapped. "Do not play games with me, Terran. I am the only thing standing between you and a laser scalpel. You destroyed a fleet with a machine that should not run. I saw the energy readings. It was not nuclear. It was not fusion. It was psionic. That tank reacts to you." Ash looked up, and for a moment, the exhaustion on his face cracked, revealing a burning, cynical intelligence. "You want to know how it works? You want the schematics so you can paint them gold and put them on your hover ships?" "I want to understand," Zarea insisted. "I want to know why a ghost from a dead race is fighting a war that ended 60 years ago." Ash laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound. He stood up. Zarea took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was taller than he looked sitting down. He towered over her, smelling of grease and ancient anger. "The war never ended, Princess," Ash said, stepping into her personal space. "You just stopped counting the bodies because they weren't yours anymore. You think because you built palaces in the sky and wear silk that it costs more than a human city that you are civilized?" He reached out. Zarea flinched, expecting a strike. But he only took the edge of her silk sleeve between his rough, calloused thumb and forefinger. The contrast was jarring, the delicate, shimmering blue fabric against his scarred, dirt-stained skin. "Look at this," Ash said softly, his voice dripping with disdain. "It is soft. It is pretty. It tears if you catch it on a nail. That is your empire. Zarea, it is pretty, and it is expensive, and it is weak." Zarea pulled her arm away, anger flushing her cheeks violet. "My empire spans 12 systems. We brought order to the chaotic sectors. We brought culture to the savages. We extinguished the Terran threat because humanity was a plague of violence." Ash's eyes narrowed. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Is that what they teach you in school?" he asked quietly. "That we were the plague?" "It is history," Zarea declared, lifting her chin. "It is a brochure." Ash spat. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "We weren't the enemy, Princess. We were the test subjects. Your people aren't the masters of this galaxy. They are just the scientists running the experiment, and sooner or later, every lab rat bites the hand that feeds it." Zarea stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "What are you talking about?" "Check the files," Ash said, backing away and sitting down on the disk again, dismissing her. "The real files, not the ones they read to you at bedtime. Go ask your daddy why the Vayari ships were orbiting Earth 10 years before the first shot was fired. Go ask him what Project Uplift was." "There is no such project," Zarea said, though doubt pricked at her mind like a needle. "I go look," Ash said, closing his eyes and leaning his head back against the nothingness. "Or go back to your party and drink your nectar. It makes no difference to me. I will be dead by morning anyway." Zarea stood there for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of his chest. She wanted to slap him. She wanted to demand he show respect, but the certainty in his voice, the absolute bone-deep conviction, terrified her. She turned and walked out of the cell. The field hummed back into existence behind her. "Guard," she snapped at the warden. "I am going to the archives. If anyone enters this cell before I return, anyone, even the Grand Vizier, you page me immediately." The Grand Archives of House Vayari were located deep beneath the floating palace, in a vault cooled to near absolute zero to preserve the crystalline data shards of the Dominion's history. It was a library of light, where billions of terabytes of information floated in the air like dust motes. Zarea walked through the silent rows of data towers, her footsteps echoing on the obsidian floor. She was technically not allowed in the restricted sector without the Grand Vizier's biometric key, but she was the heir, and she had learned long ago that the security systems were programmed to recognize her genetic sequence as a master override. She found a terminal in the shadows of a looming server stack. Her hands trembled slightly as she raised them to the holographic interface. "Query," she whispered. "Terran War. Origins." The system chimed. A stream of golden text scrolled in the air. It was the standard narrative: Terran aggression, colonial expansion. The Dominion intervened to preserve galactic peace. "Cross-reference," Zarea commanded. "Project uplift." The system paused. A red warning sigil pulsed in the air. "Clearance required. Level violet." "I am Princess Zarea Vayari," she said, placing her palm on the scanner. "Override." The red sigil flickered and dissolved. The data stream changed color, turning a stark, clinical blue. Files began to unfurl, not propaganda videos, but raw logistic reports, biological assessments, and communication logs dated 80 years ago, 20 years before the war began. Zarea began to read, and as she did, the cold of the archives seemed to seep into her marrow. Subject: Terran species. Assessment: highly aggressive, high adaptability to trauma, potential for psionic latency under extreme emotional duress. Proposal: covert destabilization of planetary governments to induce global conflict. Observe results. Test limits of species-wide adrenaline and grief response. Zarea's hand flew to her mouth. The Vayari hadn't invaded Earth to stop a war. They had invaded to start one. They had manipulated economies, assassinated leaders, and pushed humanity to the brink of self-destruction just to see what would happen. To see if humans would evolve or break. She swiped to the next file. Weaponization of grief. Field Test 4. The destruction of the North American sector. Goal: create a psychic shockwave sufficient to power the experimental phase drive. The text blurred before her eyes. Ash was right. Her people were not conquerors. They were vivisectionists. They had tortured an entire species to death to try and fuel a new type of engine, and they had failed. The humans had died too fast, or fought back too hard, and the Vayari had simply wiped the slate clean and buried the evidence. "We are monsters," she whispered to the empty darkness. "Princess?" Zarea spun around, the data stream vanishing with a wave of her hand. Standing at the entrance of the aisle was High Counselor Zol, her father's advisor. He was smiling, but his eyes were dead. "You are far from your chambers, Highness," Zol said, clasping his hands within his velvet sleeves. I could not sleep," Zarea stammered, her mind racing. "I was looking for tactical data on the rebel weapon." "Ah, the tank," Zol said, walking closer. "A fascinating relic. The Grand Vizier and your father are discussing it right now in the war room. Perhaps you should join them, rather than digging through dusty old files." It was not a suggestion. It was steering. Zarea nodded, smoothing her expression into a mask of calm. "Of course. I should report my findings from the interrogation." She walked past him, her heart pounding in her throat. She had to get to the war room. She had to know what they were planning. The war room was a circular chamber dominated by a three-dimensional tactical map of the galaxy. Zarea's father, Emperor Vayari IV, sat on his floating throne, looking bored. The Grand Vizier, a hunched creature with cybernetic ocular implants, was gesturing at a hologram of Ash's tank. Zarea slipped into the shadows of the upper balcony. She did not announce herself. "Cannot simply execute him yet, my liege," the Vizier was saying, his voice grating and mechanical. "The machine is dead. We have tried to power it with fusion cells, with zero-point energy, even with slave labor. It does not respond. It requires the pilot. Then torture him until he drives it for us," the Emperor said, waving a hand. "We tried a preliminary scan," the Vizier replied. The neural feedback suggests the machine is bonded to his specific neural pathways. It runs on a specific frequency of synaptic trauma. If we kill him, the tank is just scrap metal. If we torture him, his mind might snap, and the connection severs. So what do you propose? Extraction, the vizier said. The hologram shifted, showing a diagram of a human brain. We exercise the temporal lobe and the limbic system while he is alive. We graft his living neural tissue directly into the tank's processor. He becomes a wetware CPU. He will be in eternal agony, of course. But the tank will function. Zareya gripped the railing of the balcony so hard her knuckles turned white. They weren't going to just kill him. They were going to turn him into a component, a living battery of pain. Do it, the Emperor said, yawning. Prepare the surgery for tomorrow night. I want that weapon operational before the invasion of the Orion sector. Zareya backed away into the darkness. She couldn't breathe. The opulence of the palace, the gold leaf on the walls, the silk of her dress, it all felt like rot. She turned and ran. She didn't run to her chambers. She ran back to the containment block. The warden tried to stop her again, but Zareya pulled a disruptor pistol from the holster of a passing guard and leveled it at his head. "Open it!" she snarled. "Now!" The field dropped. Zareya stormed into the cell. Ash was sleeping or trying to. He lay curled on the hard floor, ignoring the gravity disk. He snapped awake the moment she entered, rolling into a crouch, his hands up in a defensive posture. When he saw it was her, he relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained wary. He saw the pistol in her hand. He saw the wild look in her eyes. "Did you come to shoot me yourself?" Ash asked. "Save the executioner on the trip?" Zareya holstered the weapon, her chest heaving. She paced the small room, her silk skirt swishing violently. "You were right," she said, "about the experiment, about the uplift. I saw the files." Ash straightened up, watching her carefully. And they are going to kill you," she said, stopping and facing him. "Worse than kill you, they are going to cut your brain out and wire it into that machine. They want to use you to conquer the Orion sector." Ash didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly. "Standard procedure. They want the ghost, not the man." "How can you be so calm?" Zareya demanded, her voice rising. "Do you want to die? Do you want to become a part of their machine?" "I'm already part of the machine, Zareya," Ash said. It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded strange in his gravelly voice, intimate. "I have been part of it since I was 19. "Who were you?" Zareya asked, stepping closer. "The records say you are Ash Weller, rank, sergeant, but sergeants do not pilot experimental phase tanks. Sergeants do not wipe out armies alone." Ash looked away. He walked to the far wall and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "I wasn't regular infantry," he admitted softly. "I was with the 7th Orbital Dropshock Troopers, Black Ops Division. We were the ones they sent in when diplomacy failed. We were the ones who found the Vayari tech in the wreckage of the first contact sites." He looked at his hands. "We found out the Vayari were manipulating our leaders. We tried to warn the High Command, but someone on the inside sold us out. My unit was ambushed in the Silo district. 30 men and women, my friends, my family." He touched the dog tags. "They didn't just die, Princess. The Vayari used a molecular destabilizer. I watched them come apart. I watched my fiancée, Sarah, dissolve into red mist while she was screaming my name. I was the only one left, and I found the prototype tank in the bunker we were guarding. It opened for me. It felt what I felt. It was what I wanted." "And what did you want?" Zareya whispered. Ash looked at her. his eyes burning with a cold blue fire. I wanted the world to burn. Zaraya felt a chill run through her. She realized then that she was trapped in a room with a mass murderer who had simply run out of targets. But beneath the monster, she saw the wound. It was gaping and raw. "So you fight for ghosts," Zaraya said, trying to regain her composure. "You fight for a dead woman." "I fight because I can't stop," Ash said. "Because if I stop, I have to remember them without the noise of the cannon drowning it out." "You are a fool," Zaraya said, her voice trembling. "You are letting your grief be a weapon for the very people who caused it. If you let them vivisect you, you are giving them exactly what they wanted 60 years ago. You are proving you are just a lab rat." Ash pushed off the wall. He moved with a speed that belied his injuries. In 2 strides, he was on her. Zaraya gasped, reaching for the pistol, but he caught her wrist. His grip was iron. He didn't hurt her, but he immobilized her completely. He slammed her back against the smooth white wall of the cell. The impact knocked the breath out of her. She looked up into his face, inches from hers. He smelled of danger and sorrow. "Don't you dare lecture me about being a victim," Ash growled, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "You live in a palace floating above the bones of my world. You wear the spoils of war like jewelry. You have never lost anything. You don't know what it is to be hollowed out until the only thing holding you together is hate." "I know lies," Zaraya shouted back, not backing down, though her heart was racing so fast she thought it might explode. "I have lived my whole life in a cage of protocol. I am alone in a court of vipers. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I chose to be the daughter of a genocide?" They stared at each other. The air between them crackled, heavy and electric. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was recognition. 2 lonely things colliding in the dark. Ash looked at her mouth. Then he looked into her violet eyes. His grip on her wrist loosened, his thumb tracing the pulse point on the inside of her arm. It was racing. "You're not a viper," Ash whispered, his voice losing its edge. "You're just soft." "I am not soft," Zaraya breathed, her voice barely audible. She should push him away. She should call the guards, but she didn't. She leaned into his space, drawn by the heat of him, by the sheer, undeniable reality of him. Ash's gaze dropped to her lips again. For a second, Zaraya thought he would kiss her. She wanted him to. She wanted to know what it felt like to be touched by something that wasn't cold diplomacy or polite courtly maneuvering. She wanted the fire. Then Ash pulled back. He released her wrist and stepped away, turning his back to her. "Go," he said roughly. "Get out of here, princess, before you get hurt." Zaraya stood against the wall, her chest heaving, her skin burning where he had touched her. She felt unmoored. She felt terrified. And for the first time in her life, she felt completely awake. She adjusted her silk robe, though her hands were shaking. "They come for you at dawn," she said, her voice steadying with effort. "I will not let them take you." Ash didn't turn around. "Go!" Zaraya fled the cell. That night, the palace was silent, but Zaraya could not find peace. She lay in her massive circular bed, surrounded by pillows of woven starlight, staring at the high vaulted ceiling. She closed her eyes and tried to meditate, as she had been trained by the mentalist monks of the 4th house. But the calm void did not come. Instead, the dream came. She was standing on a battlefield. The sky was burning. Ash's tank was there, a dark silhouette against the flames, but it wasn't a machine of war anymore. It was a heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. Ash was standing in front of her. He wasn't wearing the grease-stained uniform. He was wearing dress whites, a Terran ceremonial uniform she had seen in the archives. He looked young. He looked happy. He reached out to her. She took his hand. It wasn't rough. It was warm. Then the dream shifted. The sky turned the color of bruised flesh. The ground opened up. Ash was pulled away from her, screaming. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in blood. Not his blood, her father's blood. She woke up with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in the darkness. Her skin was cold, but deep in her chest, there was an ember burning. She looked at her hands in the dim light of the room. She could still feel the phantom pressure of his grip on her wrist. She could still smell the ozone and old iron. "The experiment," she whispered to the empty room. She threw off the covers. She went to her wardrobe and pushed aside the silks. In the back, hidden in a chest, was a set of light combat armor she had used during her mandatory military service. It was matte black, functional, devoid of jewels. She began to put it on. If the Veyari wanted an experiment, she would give them one. She would show them what happened when the variable they thought they controlled decided to change the equation. The engineering spire of the High Palace was a cold, sterile monolith that pierced the upper atmosphere of the capital city. It was a place of quiet violence, where the Veyari Dominion dissected its enemies to understand how to kill them more efficiently. Princess Zereya moved through the maintenance ventilation shafts, her black stealth armor blending with the shadows of the industrial ductwork. She was not supposed to be here. She was supposed to be in her chambers, contemplating the execution of the Terran prisoner. Below her, through a grate in the floor, the main hangar bay was bathed in harsh surgical lighting. The rusted human tank sat in the center of the room, looking like a bruised fist amidst the gleaming chrome and glass of the Veyari laboratory. It was surrounded by a web of scaffolding. Thick cables were clamped onto its hull, running to banks of diagnostic computers that hummed with processing power. Zereya adjusted the optical zoom on her helmet visor. She saw 3 high-ranking scientists from the Directorate. They were not wearing hazard suits for radiation. They were wearing psionic dampeners, heavy lead-lined helmets designed to shield the mind from telepathic assault. "Energy readings are incoherent," one scientist said, his voice carrying up the shaft. "The reactor core is cold. There is no fusion reaction, no fission, no zero-point singularity. By all physical laws, this machine is dead weight." "And yet," another replied, tapping a data pad, "when we apply a localized voltage to the command chair, the armor density increases by 300%. It is not metal. It is behaving like reactive tissue." Zereya held her breath. Reactive tissue. Ash had called it a memory. "Stimulate the interface again," the lead scientist ordered. "Increase the voltage to the neural inputs. We need to isolate the power source." A technician threw a lever. An arc of blue electricity snapped along the cables, feeding directly into the tank's internal systems. The machine did not just hum. It screamed. It was not a mechanical sound. It was a sound that vibrated in Zereya's teeth, a low, resonant moan of absolute despair that seemed to come from the air itself. On the monitors surrounding the tank, static flared and then resolved into images. They were not schematics. They were not code. They were faces. Zereya watched in horror as the screens filled with the grainy black and white projections of human soldiers. Laughing, smoking, cleaning weapons. A woman with short hair and a sharp smile. A man with a heavy machine gun. They flickered and distorted, their mouths opening in silent screams as the voltage increased. "Fascinating," the lead scientist murmured, ignoring the horrifying sound. "The machine is metabolizing synaptic echoes. It is consuming the pilot's subconscious. It is a ghost engine." "Shut it down," Zereya whispered to herself, her hands gripping the grate. Prepare the extraction saw, the scientist commanded. We need to cut into the core to see how the memories are stored. If we damage the containment unit, the prisoner can always generate more trauma for us to harvest. Zaraya scrambled back from the grate. She had seen enough. They weren't just dismantling a tank. They were vivisecting a soul. And if the tank was reacting like this, screaming in pain, it meant Ash was feeling it. The connection hadn't been severed. She dropped from the vent into a service corridor, landing in a silent crouch. She checked her wrist comp. The prisoner holding cells were 12 levels down. She broke into a run. The detention block smelled of scorched meat. Zaraya burst through the double doors, her disruptor pistol in her hand, her royal signet ring flashing on her finger to override the locks. The guards at the entrance scrambled to attention, shocked by the sight of the heir in combat armor. But Zaraya did not stop. She kicked open the door to interrogation room 4. Ash was strapped to a vertical table, his arms and legs bound by restraints of hard light energy. He was stripped to the waist, his body a roadmap of scars and fresh bruises. A neural jack, far cruder than the one in the tank, was jammed into the port at the base of his skull. A thick cable ran from his head to a console where a torturer, a drone of the Intelligence Guild, was adjusting dials. Ash was convulsing. His head was thrown back. His teeth grit so hard blood was running down his chin. He wasn't screaming. He was making a low, guttural sound, a ragged denial of the pain tearing through his mind. Every time the scientists upstairs shocked the tank, the feedback loop hammered into Ash's brain. "Stop!" Zaraya screamed. The torturer turned, his faceless helmet tilting. "Highness, this is a restricted," Zaraya fired. The bolt of energy hit the console, exploding it in a shower of sparks and glass. The neural link severed instantly. Ash slumped forward in the restraints, his body going limp, his breathing ragged and shallow. "You dare," the torturer hissed, stepping forward and drawing a shock baton. "The Grand Vizier ordered this extraction. You are interfering with state security." Zaraya holstered her pistol and ripped the signet ring from her finger, holding it up. The violet stone pulsed with the authority of her bloodline. "I am invoking the imperial right of claim," she declared, her voice shaking with rage she hadn't felt in years. Article 15, Section 2. Any spoil of war brought in by a member of the royal house is the sole property of that member until the war is officially declared concluded. I captured him. He is mine. The torturer hesitated. The law was archaic, rarely used, but it was absolute. To defy it was treason. "The vizier will not accept this," the torturer warned. "He will say the war is over." "Then let him come and tell me himself," Zaraya snapped. "Release him." The torturer stood motionless for a second, calculating the odds. Then, with a stiff nod, he tapped a command on his wrist. The hard light restraints vanished. Ash fell. Zaraya surged forward, catching him before he hit the floor. He was heavy, dead weight against her, his skin burning with fever. He smelled of copper and the ozone of the torture device. "Ash," she whispered, grabbing his face. His eyes were rolled back, the whites showing. "Ash, can you hear me?" He groaned, a sound of pure agony. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice broken. "Don't. Let them." "I have you," Zaraya said, gritting her teeth. She pulled his arm over her shoulder, hauling him up. She was strong, trained in gravity combat, but he was a dense mass of muscle and bone. "We are leaving." She dragged him out of the room, past the stunned guards, and into the corridor. She couldn't take him to the medical bay. The vizier controlled the doctors. She couldn't take him to her chambers. That was the first place they would look. She took him to the one place in the palace that no one visited anymore. The old solarium. a glass-walled garden on the western spire that had been sealed since her mother died there. The solarium was a jungle of overgrown alien flora. Vines choked the statues of past emperors, and the air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. The only light came from the massive moon hanging outside the glass walls, painting the room in shades of silver and black. Zaraya laid Ash down on a stone bench covered in moss. He was shivering violently now, his body going into shock from the neural feedback. "Stay here," she commanded softly, though he was in no condition to move. She ran to a hidden supply cache she kept behind a tapestry, a habit from her childhood when she would play soldier. It had a basic field medical kit, water rations, and blankets. She returned and knelt beside him. She cracked a glow rod, bathing them in a soft amber light. She cut away the remains of his restraints with a laser knife and began to clean the blood from his chest and neck. When the wet cloth touched the raw skin around his neural port, Ash flinched, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist. His grip was crushing. "No!" he shouted, his eyes flying open. They were wild, unseeing. "Get back! Incoming fire!" "Ash!" Zaraya said firmly, not pulling away. She used her free hand to cup his jaw, forcing him to look at her. "Look at me. It is Zaraya. You are not in the tank. You are safe." Ash stared at her, his chest heaving. The panic slowly drained from his eyes, replaced by a confusing mix of pain and recognition. He looked at her violet eyes, at the black armor she wore. "Princess," he croaked. "I am here," she said, her voice softening. "Let me go." "Ash, I need to clean this." He released her wrist, his hand falling back to the stone bench. He squeezed his eyes shut. They were inside my head. They were touching them. "I know," Zaraya said. She dipped the cloth in antiseptic water again. "I stopped them." "You shouldn't have," Ash muttered, wincing as she dabbed at a deep cut on his shoulder. "They'll kill you for this." "Let them try," Zaraya said. For a long time there was only the sound of his ragged breathing and the drip of water. Zaraya worked with methodical precision, cleaning the grime and blood from his skin. It was an intimate act, far more intimate than anything she had ever experienced. She knew the anatomy of a warrior, but she had never touched one with care. She traced the jagged line of a scar that ran from his collarbone to his hip. "Shrapnel?" she asked quietly. "Plasma burn," Ash corrected, his voice stabilizing. "Battle of New Kyoto, 50 years ago. You have been fighting a long time. Too long." She moved to his back. The skin there was knotted with tension. As she washed him, she felt the heat of his body radiating through her gloves. She took them off, needing to feel the temperature of his skin to gauge his fever. Her cool fingertips brushed his spine. Ash stiffened, then slowly relaxed, leaning into her touch. The boundaries between them, built of war and species and rank, began to dissolve in the amber light. He was not a monster. He was a man who had been hurt so many times his body was a catalogue of pain. And she was not a princess. She was just a woman trying to keep him alive. "Why did you save me?" Ash asked, his voice low. He didn't turn around. Zaraya paused, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Because I saw what they were doing to the machine. I saw the faces." Ash went still. "I saw a woman," Zaraya whispered. Short hair, a sharp smile. Ash let out a breath that shuddered through his entire frame. He turned slowly, sitting up to face her. The movement brought their faces close together. "Sarah," he said. The name hung in the air like a prayer. "Who was she?" "She was my second in command," Ash said. He looked down at his hands, twisting the broken dog tags. We grew up together in the undercity of Mars. We enlisted together. We promised that we would be the last ones standing. He looked up at Zaraya. The tank, it's not just a weapon. It's a psychic resonator. The Terran scientists built it to run on adrenaline, on the fight-or-flight response. But when my unit died, when I felt them die, the tank imprinted on that. It didn't just record the adrenaline, it recorded the loss. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. It runs on grief, Zaraya. It needs to remember them to work. Every time I fire that cannon, I have to relive the moment they died. Every single time, that's the fuel. I burn my own heart to make it move. Zaraya felt tears prick her eyes. She had thought the Vayari were cruel, but this was a torture of Ash's own making. He was trapping himself in a loop of eternal mourning just to keep fighting a war that was already lost. It remembers them, Ash whispered. That's why it kills. It wants to protect them, even though they are already gone. You cannot carry that alone, Zaraya said, her voice trembling. It will destroy you. It already has, Ash said. No, Zaraya said fiercely. You are still here. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, twice the size of hers. But he didn't pull away. He laced his fingers through hers, gripping tight, as if she were an anchor in a storm. My mother died in this room, Zaraya confessed. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She had never told anyone this. She was the queen, but she wanted peace. She advocated for a treaty with the outer systems. One evening, she was pruning these vines. I was 6 years old. I was hiding behind that statue, waiting to surprise her. She pointed to a marble figure choked with ivy. I saw the shadow on the wall, Zaraya said, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. I saw the flash of the energy blade. She didn't even scream. She just fell. They never found the assassin. My father said it was a Terran spy. But I saw the shadow. Ash. It moved like a Vayari. It moved like a dancer. Ash squeezed her hand. You think your father did it. I think my father loved power more than he loved her, Zaraya said. And I think he looks at me and sees her weakness. That is why he sent me to the front. He wanted me to see the slaughter. He wanted to harden me. He failed, Ash said. Zaraya looked at him, startled. What? He didn't harden you, Ash said, raising his free hand to brush the tear from her cheek. His thumb was rough, but his touch was impossibly gentle. He just made you lonely. And loneliness is dangerous. It makes you look for things that aren't supposed to be found. Zaraya's breath hitched. He was so close. She could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. She could feel the heat of his body mixing with the cool night air. The connection between them was suddenly terrified and electric. It wasn't just shared trauma. It was a recognition of the same void in each other's souls. She leaned in. Ash leaned in. His gaze dropped to her lips. The air seemed to vibrate. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted to burn down the protocol, the history, the war. She wanted to feel something real. Their lips were a breath apart. She could feel the warmth of his exhale. Then the sound of boots marching in the corridor below echoed up through the ventilation. Zaraya pulled back, gasping as if surfacing from deep water. She stood up, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself, trembling. We cannot, she whispered. Not here. Not while they are hunting you. Ash stayed seated on the bench. He looked at his empty hand, then clenched it into a fist. He nodded slowly. You're right. I'm a dead man walking. Zereya, you shouldn't get mixed up with a ghost. You are not a ghost, Zereya said, turning back to him, her face fierce in the amber light. And I am done doing what I should. She went to the door of the solarium and locked it. She jammed a metal bar under the handle. Then she returned to the bench. She didn't sit next to him. She sat on the floor, leaning her back against the stone, looking out at the moon. Get some sleep, she said. I will keep watch. Ash watched her for a moment. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him exhausted. He laid back down on the stone bench, using his arm as a pillow. Zereya, he said. Sleep. Ash. Outside the solarium, in the shadows of the vaulted hallway, a figure stood perfectly still. The royal spy master. A slender Veyari with eyes that had been replaced by multi-spectral sensors. Watched the heat signatures through the heavy oak doors. He saw the two forms, one on the bench, one on the floor. He saw the proximity. He saw the erratic heart rates that indicated heightened emotional states. He tapped a communication link on his collar. Grand Vizier, the spy master whispered. The princess has secured the asset. She has taken him to the old solarium. She has invoked the right of claim. Does she know we are watching? The vizier's voice crackled in his ear. She suspects, the spy master said, but she is compromised. Her biometrics indicate a severe deviation from baseline loyalty. She is bonding with the subject. Excellent, the vizier replied. Let her bond. The stronger the connection, the more leverage we have. Let her think she is saving him. When the time comes, we will use her to force him to activate the weapon. Keep watching. If they attempt to leave the palace, neutralize the human. But leave the girl. She still has a part to play. Understood. The spy master melded back into the shadows. A phantom in the House of Kings. Inside the solarium. The hours stretched into the deep silence of early morning. The temperature dropped. The heating units in the old wing had been broken for years. Zereya shivered in her armor. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to conserve warmth. She was exhausted, her mind a whirlwind of treason and desire. You're cold. Ash's voice came from above her. She looked up. He was awake, looking down at her over the edge of the bench. I am fine, she lied. You're shivering, Ash said. He sat up and moved over, patting the empty space on the narrow stone bench. Come here. Zereya hesitated. That is practical, Ash cut her off. Body heat. Survival 101. Unless you want to freeze to death before the execution squad gets here. Zereya looked at the stone bench. It was narrow. There would be no space between them. She stood up and slowly sat down beside him. Ash lay back down against the wall, and Zereya lay beside him, her back to his chest. He was radiating heat like a furnace. He didn't try to touch her inappropriately. He simply draped his heavy arm over her waist, pulling her tight against him to share the warmth. It was a soldier's embrace, functional, protective, solid. Zereya stiffened for a moment, then let out a long breath she didn't know she had been holding. She relaxed into him. She could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart against her back. She could smell the soap she had used to clean him and the faint, lingering scent of tobacco. It was the safest she had ever felt in her life. In the darkness. Her hand moved down to her waist. She found his hand, the one resting over her armor. She interlaced her fingers with his. Ash squeezed her hand back. They will come for us in the morning, Zereya whispered. Let them come, Ash murmured, his voice thick with sleep. We have tonight. Zereya closed her eyes. For the first time in 22 years, the loneliness that lived in her chest went quiet. She drifted into sleep, not dreaming of war or politics, but of a tank that ran on love instead of grief, and the man who held the keys to both. The morning light filtered through the overgrown canopy of the old solarium, casting dappled shadows on the stone floor. Zaraya woke first. For a moment, disoriented by the scent of jasmine and the warmth of the body beside her. She forgot the war. She forgot the execution order hanging over their heads like a guillotine blade. She simply felt the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of Ash's chest against her back, a solid anchor in a world that had turned into quicksand. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake him. Though she suspected the soldier slept with one eye open, she activated her wrist comp, the holographic display projecting a faint blue sphere in the dim light. She needed to know what the Grand Vizier was planning. She bypassed the standard encryption, utilizing a backdoor code her mother had taught her. A code meant for emergencies, for when the palace turned against its own blood. The data streams that flooded her vision turned her blood to ice. It was a project file labeled Mimicry. Zaraya scrolled through the logs, her hand trembling. The Vizier's scientists hadn't just been studying Ash's tank, they had been trying to clone it. The files showed grainy footage of Vayari test pilots, elite soldiers, mentalists, patriots, strapped into replica cockpits wired with copied neural jacks. She watched a video dated 2 days ago. A Vayari lieutenant screamed as the machine engaged. It wasn't a scream of physical pain, it was the sound of a mind being eaten. The pilot seized, foam bubbling at his mouth, his eyes turning liquid red. The machine didn't move, it just fed. Subject expired. The log read, "Cause of death, total synaptic collapse. The machine demands a specific emotional frequency. It rejects ambition, it rejects rage, it requires loss." Zaraya shut off the display, nausea rolling in her stomach. They were feeding their own people to the grinder, trying to reverse engineer a ghost. Bad news? Ash's voice was rough with sleep. He was sitting up, rubbing the back of his neck where the neural jack scars were inflamed. "Worse," Zaraya whispered. "They are trying to build their own fleet of atonement engines, but they don't work. They are killing the pilots because they don't have what you have." Ash looked at her, his eyes dark. "They don't have dead friends. We have to stop them," Zaraya said, standing up and smoothing her black armor. "If they figure out the frequency, if they learn how to simulate grief, they will have an army of invincible machines. They will burn the galaxy just to see it, Ash." "The tank is useless without the source," Ash said, standing and cracking his knuckles. "The core programming, the original drive signature, they can't copy it if they don't have the seed code." "Where is it?" Zaraya asked. "It's in the prototype," Ash said. "Not my tank. The first one. The one they built on Mars before the fall. The Vayari took it as a trophy 60 years ago. It was too dangerous to display, so they buried it." Zaraya's eyes widened. "The deep vaults. Sub-level 0. My father keeps the darkest relics of the conquest there." "Then that is where we go," Ash said. He reached down and picked up a heavy metal pipe he had scavenged from the garden's irrigation system. It was a crude weapon, but in his hands, it looked lethal. "We found the prototype. We destroy the source code. We end the lineage." "It is suicide," Zaraya said, though she was already checking the charge on her disruptor pistol. "The deep vaults are guarded by the Praetorian Shadow Guard. They are not conscripts. They are killers." Ash looked at her, a grim smile touching his lips. "Good. I hate hitting amateurs." The descent into the bowels of the palace was a journey through the geological strata of the Vayari Empire. The upper levels were light, air, and gold. The middle levels were bureaucracy and barracks. But as they took the service lifts down, bypassing security checkpoints with Zarea's retinal overrides, the world became dark, humid, and ancient. The air in the deep vault smelled of stagnant water and ozone. The walls were not white polymer here. They were raw bedrock reinforced with heavy iron beams. The lighting was sparse, flickering amber strips that barely cut the gloom. Zarea moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, her boots making no sound on the grate. Ash moved like a landslide, heavy, inevitable, but surprisingly quiet. They moved in tandem, a strange symmetry developing between the princess and the soldier. Up ahead, Zarea whispered, holding up a hand. They were at the junction of the main arterial corridor leading to the Vault of Silence. A security checkpoint blocked the path. 4 Praetorian guards stood motionless, their armor matte black, their faces obscured by faceless visors. They held heavy plasma lances. "I can flank them," Ash breathed into her ear. "You draw their fire." "I am the heir," Zarea argued. "I can order them to stand down." "Not down here," Ash said. "Down here, there is no rank, only authorization." Before Zarea could formulate a plan, the decision was made for them. A hidden sensor swept over them, turning from green to angry crimson. A klaxon wailed, shattering the silence. "Intruder alert. Sector 4. Lethal force authorized." The Praetorians moved instantly. Plasma fire erupted down the corridor, searing the air with blistering heat. Zarea dove behind a structural pillar, sparks raining down on her helmet as a bolt disintegrated the concrete inches from her head. The sound was deafening. She had overseen battles from a viewing deck. She had never been in the chaotic, terrifying, swirling center of one. Ash didn't hide. He surged forward. He used the momentum of his run to slide across the floor, coming in under the high angle of the guard's fire. He swung the metal pipe with bone-shattering force. It connected with the knee joint of the lead Praetorian. The armor crunched, the leg buckled, and the guard went down screaming. Ash rolled, grabbed the falling guard's plasma lance, and fired point-blank into the chest of the second guard. "Move!" Ash roared. Zarea scrambled from cover, raising her pistol. The remaining 2 guards were adjusting their aim, their target-locking algorithms tracking Ash. One of them turned toward her. Zarea saw her own reflection in his black visor. She saw the barrel of his weapon glow white-hot. She didn't think so. She didn't weigh morality. She pulled the trigger. Her disruptor pistol coughed. The blue energy bolt struck the guard in the throat, the weakest point of the armor seals. He didn't fly backward like in the movies, he just dropped. He gargled, a wet, horrible sound, and clawed at his neck as the life drained out of him in a hiss of cauterized flesh. Zarea froze. The weapon shook in her hands. She was killed. She had extinguished a life. A man who might have had a family, a brood, a name. The 4th guard, seeing his comrade fall, lunged at Zarea with a monofilament knife. Zarea was paralyzed by the shock of her action. She watched the blade arc toward her ribs. A hand grabbed the guard's wrist. Ash was there. He didn't look heroic. He looked terrifying. He twisted the guard's arm with a sickening snap, drove a knee into the alien's solar plexus, and slammed him head first into the iron wall. The guard slumped, unconscious or dead. Silence returned to the corridor, broken only by the wail of the alarm and Zarea's jagged breathing. She stared at the body of the guard she had shot. Her voice cracked. "I killed him." Ash stepped in front of her, blocking her view of the corpse. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip hard enough to ground her, to pull her back from the spiraling panic. "Look at me," he commanded. Zarea looked up. His face was smeared with grease and sweat, but his eyes were clear. "He was going to kill you," Ash said. "That is the only math that matters right now, you or him. You chose you. Do not apologize for surviving." It felt... Zaraya swallowed bile. It felt like nothing, just a click. That is the danger, Ash said, his voice softening slightly. It gets easier. Don't let it get easier. Zaraya, but right now, we have to move. The reinforcements are coming. He took her hand, not romantically but tactically, pulling her forward. Zaraya stumbled, then found her footing. She forced the image of the dying guard into a box in the back of her mind and locked it. Later, she would weep. Now, she had to run. They reached the heavy blast doors of the Vault of Silence. Zaraya placed her palm on the DNA scanner. It flashed red. Access denied. My father has revoked my clearance, she said, panic rising. Stand back, Ash said. He raised the stolen plasma lance. Terran key. He fired a continuous beam into the locking mechanism. Metal turned to slag. Molten iron dripped onto the floor. With a groan of protesting hydraulics, the blast doors lost their seal and cracked open. They slipped inside and sealed the door behind them, jamming the mechanism with the bent metal pipe. The vault was vast. It was a cathedral of dead technology. Rows of pedestals held artifacts from a dozen conquered worlds. Crystalline swords from the nebulas, gravity drives from the core systems, but in the center, bathed in a spotlight of pure white, sat the prototype. It was not a tank. It was a cockpit, suspended in a gyroscope of glass and chrome cables. It looked like a womb made of circuitry, and it was beautiful in a tragic, haunting way. Ash walked toward it slowly, his weapon lowered. The atmosphere in the room changed. The air felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on Zaraya's arms stand up. This is it, Ash whispered. The cradle. Zaraya approached the console next to the machine. She wiped the dust from the screen and activated the logs. This isn't Vayari tech, she said, reading the scrolling text. And it is not standard Terran military either. The author, Dr. Elias Thorne. The architect, Ash said. He disappeared a year before the invasion. We thought he defected. He didn't defect, Zaraya said, her voice hollow. He was trying to save his son. She pulled up the core file. A holographic recording flickered to life above the console. A human man, haggard and weeping, spoke to the camera. Log 001, my son is dying, the trauma of the accident. His mind is trapped in a loop of pain. The doctors say he is gone. But I can save him. I have built a machine that can map the neural pathways of grief. It doesn't just record memory, it gives it physical form. It turns sorrow into energy. I will build him a body of iron that cannot be hurt. I will let him live in the memory of what he lost, because that is the only place he is still alive. The recording flickered. Log 099. The military found out. They took my machine. They want to put guns on it. They don't understand. It is an atonement engine. It preserves the moment of loss so perfectly that reality itself bends around it. It is not a weapon. It is a tomb. The hologram faded. Zaraya turned to Ash. He was standing before the gyroscope, his hand resting on the glass. He wasn't looking at the machine. He was looking through it. A tomb, Zaraya whispered. That is why it works for you. You aren't piloting a tank. Ash, you are piloting a mausoleum. Ash turned to her. His face was stripped of all its soldier's armor. He looked incredibly young and incredibly old all at once. I never left that bunker, he said softly. 60 years. I've been walking, eating, and fighting, but I never left. Every time I jack in, I'm back there. I see the flash and I hear her scream, and I refuse to let it go, because if I let it go, she is really dead. She is dead. Ash, Zaraya said, stepping closer. Tears streamed down her face. She has been dead for a lifetime. You are the only one haunting this place." "I know," he choked out. "God, I know." The sounds of cutting torches began to echo from the blast door behind them. The guards were cutting their way in. They had minutes, perhaps less. But in the circle of white light, time seemed to stop. Zereya looked at this man, this broken, rusted thing that had destroyed an army for the sake of a ghost. She saw the immense capacity for love that had been twisted into violence, and she realized, with a jolt that nearly stopped her heart, that she didn't want to fix him, she just wanted to be with him. She closed the distance between them. She reached out and took the dog tags from around his neck. The metal was warm from his skin. "You wanted someone to remember them," she said fiercely. "I will remember them. I will carry them. You do not have to do it alone anymore." Ash looked at her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of deception, any hint of the royal game. He found only raw, terrified honesty. "Zereya," he breathed. He reached out and cupped her face. His hands were rough, stained with the violence of the corridor, but his touch was reverence. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it was a collision. It was the crashing of two worlds that should never have touched. It tasted of blood and adrenaline and salt. Zereya made a sound in her throat, a sob that turned into a gasp as she pulled him closer, her fingers digging into the muscle of his shoulders. Ash groaned, burying his hands in her hair, pulling her against him as if he could merge their broken pieces into something whole. He backed her up against the console, the holographic light playing over their skin. The kiss deepened, becoming desperate. It was a shedding of skins. Zereya wasn't the princess, she wasn't the heir. She was just a woman who had been cold for 22 years and had finally found a fire. And Ash wasn't the ghost in the rust. He was a man who had been holding his breath for 6 decades and was finally exhaling. "I have wanted you," Ash murmured against her neck, his voice rough with need. "Since the moment you looked at me in that cell and didn't flinch." "I am scared," Zereya confessed, tilting her head back as his lips traced the line of her throat. "I am terrified." "Good," Ash growled, lifting her up onto the console, pushing aside the data pads. "Fear means you're alive." He kissed her again, and the world narrowed down to the heat of his skin and the friction of the armor being stripped away. It was frantic and messy and beautiful. In the shadow of the machine built for grief, they found something that felt violently like life. Zereya cried. She cried as his hands mapped her body, erasing the protocol, erasing the expectations. She cried because for the first time in her life, she wasn't being worshipped or used. She was just being wanted, not for her title, not for her bloodline, but for the beating heart inside her chest. When they finally slowed, tangled together in the dim light, the only sound was their harsh breathing and the distant hiss of the cutting torches working on the door. Ash rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. He looked peaceful for the first time since she had met him. The tension in his jaw was gone. Zereya ran her hand through his grizzled hair, smoothing it back. She traced the scar on his cheek. "We have to destroy it," she whispered. "The prototype, the data." Ash opened his eyes. He looked at the glass gyroscope. "If we destroy it, the Veyari can never build more. But it means Sarah is really gone. The memory dies with the machine." "No," Zereya said firmly. She took his hand and placed it over her heart. "The memory lives here, and in you. That is where they belong. Not in a weapon. Not in a cage." Ash looked at her, and a slow realization dawned on him. He looked at the machine that had been his anchor and his curse. Then he looked at the woman who had walked into the dark to find him. "I never wanted revenge," Ash whispered. his voice cracking. I just wanted someone to remember us. I just didn't want to be the last one. You are not the last one, Zaraya said. She kissed his bruised knuckles. We are the first. A loud clang echoed through the vault. The blast door buckled. A glowing orange line appeared in the center of the metal. The guards were through. Ash hopped down from the console. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked focused. He began pulling his armor back into place, checking the charge on the plasma lance. We have to rig the core to overload, Ash said. We can use the disruptor cells from your pistol and the plasma battery. It will create a magnetic resonance cascade. It will wipe every drive in this room and melt the prototype to slag. And us? Zaraya asked, sliding off the console and retrieving her pistol. Ash looked at the ventilation duct high on the wall. We climb. We fight. We live. He rigged the explosives with practiced speed, his hands steady. He set the timer for 3 minutes. Zaraya, he said, turning to her as the blast door began to fall inward with a groan of tortured steel. Yes? If we make it out, he said, I'm going to need a new ride. Zaraya looked at the falling door, then at the man she had just given her soul to. A fierce, dangerous smile spread across her face, a smile that belonged to a queen of ashes, not a princess of silk. Then we burn them all, she said. Ash grinned. It was a true grin, sharp and wolfish. Burn them all, he agreed. He grabbed her hand, and together they sprinted toward the shadows just as the blast doors crashed down and the Praetorian guards stormed the vault, unaware that they were stepping into a tomb that was about to become a volcano. The explosion in the deep vault sent a tremor through the skeletal structure of the floating palace, a shudder that rattled the teeth of the aristocracy miles above. Smoke, thick and acrid, began to bleed through the ventilation grates of the lower levels, carrying the scent of melted history. Princess Zaraya and Ash Weller did not look back at the fire they had lit. They were moving upward, ascending through the service spines of the colossal ship city, their lungs burning with exertion. The alarm klaxons were screaming now, a rhythmic mechanical shriek that signaled a fortress breach. The fleet! Ash rasped, checking the charge on the stolen plasma lance as they sprinted up a spiral gangway. We have to stop the launch. Zaraya glanced at the tactical display on her wrist. The holographic sphere was awash in red icons. The staging orbit is saturated. My father has accelerated the timeline. The invasion fleet is not preparing for tomorrow. They are engines hot now. They launch within the hour. They burst through a maintenance hatch into the gilded hallway of the royal sector. The contrast was jarring, from the industrial grime of the vaults to the pristine, diamond-dusted corridors of power. Guards were running in the opposite direction, toward the lower levels, confused by the sabotage below. Go to the hangar, Zaraya commanded, stopping and turning toward the massive double doors of the throne room. Secure the tank. I need to buy us time. Ash grabbed her arm. His grip was tight, his eyes wild with the lingering adrenaline of the vault. Zaraya, don't do this. We get the tank and we run. You don't owe them an explanation. I am not doing this for them, Zaraya said, her voice hard as flint. I am doing it to break his hold on the people. If I leave now, I am a fugitive. If I face him, I am a revolution. Ash searched her face, looking for the terrified girl he had met in the cell. She was gone. In her place was something forged in the same fire that powered his engine. He nodded once, released her, and turned toward the hangar bays. Zaraya smoothed her black combat armor. She wiped a smudge of grease from her cheek. She pushed open the doors to the throne room. The grand hall was a cavern of light and stained glass. Hovering amongst the clouds, Emperor Vayari IV sat upon the gravity throne, surrounded by the High Council and the holographic projections of the invasion fleet admirals. The room was tense, the news of the explosion below just reaching them. When Zereya entered, the conversation died. She looked like a wraith of war. Her armor was scorched, her hair was wild. She carried the disruptor pistol at her hip, not holstered, but magnetic locked for a quick draw. "Zereya," the Emperor said, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the hall. It was not a greeting, it was an accusation. "You are covered in filth, and the lower levels are burning. Explain yourself." Zereya walked to the center of the room. She did not bow. She stood amidst the holograms of the warships, ships designed to burn Earth to ash, and looked her father in the eye. "The prototype is destroyed," she announced, her voice ringing clear. "The legacy of the experiment is gone. There will be no army of ghost machines," the council murmured. The Emperor's face went still, a mask of reptilian coldness. "You destroyed Imperial property," he said softly. "You have betrayed your blood." "I have cleansed it," Zereya retorted. She turned to the floating cameras that broadcast the court proceedings to the populace of the city ship and the fleet beyond. "Hear me. The war on Earth is a lie. The humans did not attack us. We provoked them. We tortured them. We are not bringing order to the galaxy. We are harvesting its pain to fuel our own vanity." "Cut the feed!" the Grand Vizier shrieked from the shadows. "Let them hear!" Zereya shouted, drawing her pistol and firing a shot into the ceiling, shattering a chandelier of singing crystals. The crash silenced the guards who had started to move toward her. "We are monsters wrapped in silk, and I will not let this fleet launch. I command the Veyari forces to stand down." The Emperor stood up. He looked at his daughter not with anger, but with disappointment. "You are just like your mother," he said. "Weak, sentimental, and ultimately disposable." He gestured to the Praetorian guard lining the walls. "Kill her." Zereya didn't wait. She threw a flash pulse grenade, one she had lifted from the armory supply in the vault, onto the polished floor. Bang! A blinding white light erupted, overloading the optical sensors of the guards and the cybernetic eyes of the Vizier. In the chaos, Zereya turned and sprinted. Plasma bolts sizzled through the space where she had been standing a microsecond before. She dove through the side antechamber, shattering the decorative glass, and rolled into the service corridor. "Seal the exits!" the Emperor roared over the intercom. "Hunt her down!" Zereya ran. She ran with the desperation of a woman who had just burned her only bridge. She vaulted over service carts, slid under closing blast doors, and scrambled up the gantries leading to the royal hangar. She burst into the flight deck just as the heavy security shutters began to descend. The hangar was a scene of carnage. 24 guards lay unconscious or groaning on the floor. In the center of the bay, surrounded by the wreckage of support equipment, sat the rusted Terran tank. Ash was on top of the turret, manually cranking the heavy iron hatch. The tank was humming, a deep, violent resonance that vibrated in the floor plating. "Zereya!" he yelled, extending a hand. She leaped onto the treads, scrambling up the rough, rusted metal armor. Ash hauled her up and dropped her into the commander's hatch. He followed, sealing the heavy iron lid just as a plasma-heavy repeater opened fire from the hangar control room, sparking harmlessly off the hull. Inside, the tank was a sweltering box of noise and heat. Ash slid into the pilot's harness. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the neural jack, the crude, invasive spike that connected his brain to the machine, and jammed it into the port at the base of his skull. He screamed. It was a sound of pure, white-hot agony as the connection was established. His back arched, his muscles seizing. "Ash!" Zarea cried, reaching for him. "Don't touch me," he gasped, sweat instantly popping out on his forehead. "The feedback. It's too hot. It'll burn you." "I am not leaving you in the dark," Zarea said. She didn't plug in. She didn't have a port. Instead, she reached out and placed her hands on his shoulders. She pressed her forehead against the back of his neck, right above the jack. "Let me in," she whispered. "Use me." Ash grit his teeth. "Zarea, no! Do it!" The tank lurched, and then the connection snapped open. Zarea gasped as the world fell away. She wasn't in the tank anymore. She was in the circuit. She didn't feel the physical pain of the jack. She felt the emotional torrent that powered the engine. She felt the crushing weight of Ash's grief, the faces of his dead unit, the scream of Sarah, the 60 years of silence. It hit her like a tidal wave. But she didn't drown. She pushed back. She poured her own sorrow into the stream. She fed the machine the image of her mother dying in the garden. She fed it the loneliness of the palace. She fed it the betrayal of her father. The machine hesitated. It had only ever known one flavor of pain. Now, it tasted like two. The hum of the engine changed pitch. It went from a low growl to a high, singing harmonic that shattered the glass of the periscope monitors. The interior lights of the tank didn't glow amber anymore. They flared a brilliant, blinding violet. "Synchronization complete," the machine whispered in their minds. "Dual core active." "Hold on," Ash growled, his voice echoing with a metallic reverb. The tank smashed through the reinforced blast doors of the hangar. It didn't stop at the edge of the flight deck. It drove straight off the floating palace, plunging into the open sky thousands of feet above the city. Gravity sensors screamed. The tank fell like a stone for 3 seconds. Then, reality bent. The violet energy wreathing the tank solidified. The treads bite into the air itself, finding traction on a hard light pathway generated by the sheer psionic output of the two pilots. The tank roared, defying physics, and charged downward toward the gathered fleet. "Targeting," Ash and Zarea said in unison. Below them, the Vayari invasion fleet was a sea of sleek silver sharks rising through the clouds. Destroyers, frigates, and the massive dreadnought Sovereign. "They are launching," Ash said. "Break them." The tank's main cannon tracked the lead dreadnought, but it didn't fire a shell. It fired a beam of concentrated instability. A rip in the fabric of space-time colored the bruised purple of a dying star. The beam struck the Sovereign. The dreadnought didn't explode. It flickered. For a second, the massive ship existed in two places at once, its matter phasing out of sync with the universe. Then, the laws of physics snapped back like a rubber band. The ship sheared in half, the front crumpling into the back with a sound that was felt rather than heard. "Impossible," a voice crackled over the open comms channel. It was General Kyle. "All batteries target the anomaly." Hundreds of plasma turrets turned skyward, the air filled with blinding blue fire. Phase shift, Zarea thought. The tank dissolved into mist. The plasma bolts passed harmlessly through the smoke. A second later, the tank materialized directly on top of the hull of a frigate. The treads ground into the pristine silver metal of the alien ship. Ash spun the tank in place, the rear armor crushing the bridge tower. "Fire at will," Ash commanded. The coaxial machine guns spun up. They weren't firing lead. They were firing bolts of kinetic hatred. The rounds punched through the energy shields of the nearby fighters as if they weren't there. Every shot was guided not by a computer, but by the instinctual rage of the princess and the soldier. The battle became a blur of impossible geometry. The tank was everywhere. It was teleporting between ships, leaving trails of purple lightning. It appeared inside the shield radius of a destroyer and detonated its munitions magazine with a point-blank shot. It dropped from the clouds to crush a squadron of drones beneath its treads. Soldiers on the decks of the warships panicked. They were fighting a ghost. They were fighting a legend. The morale of the Veyari army, built on the foundation of technological superiority, crumbled the moment they realized their technology couldn't touch the rusted beast. "They are breaking," Ash shouted over the roar of the cannon. "The formation is scattering." "The flagship," Zarea said. Her mind merged with the targeting computer. "My father is on the flagship. We take the head off the snake." The tank revved its engine, gathering the ambient psionic energy of the battlefield. It launched itself from the burning husk of a frigate, arcing through the sky toward the Emperor's personal command carrier. Suddenly, a shadow fell over them, a sleek black interceptor craft, unmarked and fast as a thought, dove from the upper atmosphere. It wasn't firing plasma. It fired a disruption pulse, a localized dampening field designed to sever neural links. The tank shuddered violently. The violet light flickered. "We're losing cohesion," Ash yelled, grabbing the manual controls as the tank began to drop from the sky. "It is him," Zarea hissed. She could feel the cold, calculating presence behind the attack. "The spy master." The black interceptor looped around for a kill run. It was piloting with surgical precision, targeting the tank's engine block. "He knows the frequency," Zarea realized. "He was watching us in the solarium. He knows how to disrupt the bond." "Then we don't use the bond," Ash said, wrestling the tank onto a rooftop of a collapsing skyscraper in the city below. The tracks sparked as they slid across the ferro-concrete. "We do this the old-fashioned way." The tank slammed to a halt. The interceptor swooped down, confident, its weapons charging. "Turret manual override," Ash barked. "Zarea, take the heavy stubber." Zarea pulled herself up through the hatch, exposing herself to the wind and smoke. She grabbed the grips of the mounted heavy machine gun. "Bait him!" she yelled down. Ash didn't phase the tank. He let it sit there, a heavy, rusted target. The spy master's ship dove. He fired a missile. "Now!" Ash slammed the tank into reverse. The missile struck the concrete where they had been a second before, exploding in a shower of debris. The interceptor flew through the smoke, low and fast. Zarea screamed, swinging the heavy gun. She didn't aim with the sights. She aimed with the memory of the shadow on the wall that had killed her mother. She held the trigger down. The stream of high-caliber rounds walked through the air, stitching a line of destruction across the interceptor's path. The cockpit glass shattered. The rounds tore into the delicate anti-grav engines. The black ship spiraled out of control, clipping the edge of the building and crashing into the plaza below, skidding to a halt in a shower of sparks. "He is down," Zarea said, dropping back into the tank. "Drive." Ash drove the tank off the roof, using the last of the phase energy to cushion their landing in the plaza. They rolled up to the wreckage of the black ship. The canopy blew off. The spy master crawled out. He was broken, bleeding blue blood, his cybernetic eyes sparking. He tried to reach for a weapon, but his arm was shattered. The tank stopped 10 feet away. The engine idled. A low, menacing rumble. The turret rotated, the main cannon leveling directly at the spy master's chest. Ash opened the hatch and climbed out. He had his plasma lance, but he left it holstered. He walked toward the fallen Veyari. Zarea climbed out beside him. The spy master looked up at them. He didn't look afraid. He looked contemptuous. "You have destroyed the fleet," the spy master coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. "But you have saved nothing. The chaos you have unleashed will consume this world." "Better chaos than slavery," Ash said, standing over him. "I did it for the Dominion," the spy master hissed, looking at Zarea. "Your mother. She was going to dismantle everything we built, She was a traitor to her race, just like you. Zereya went still. The confirmation hit her like a physical blow. You admit it. You held the blade. I held the blade, the spy master sneered, and I would do it again. Peace is a disease. Only dominance ensures survival. Ash drew his sidearm. He aimed it at the spy master's head. His finger tightened on the trigger. This was the man who had orchestrated the silence, the man who represented everything that had destroyed Ash's life. But then, Ash stopped. He looked at the spy master, a broken, pathetic creature dying in the dust. He looked at the burning city around them. He looked at the dog tags around Zereya's neck. He remembered the vault. It is an atonement engine, not a weapon. Ash slowly lowered the gun. Vengeance ends with me, Ash said quietly. I am done killing ghosts. The spy master laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. Weakness. Typical Terran weakness. You cannot do what is necessary. He is not Terran, Zereya said. Ash turned to look at her. Zereya stepped forward. She wasn't looking at Ash. She was looking at the spy master with eyes that were absolute zero. He is a soldier who has finished his war, Zereya said. She drew her disruptor pistol. I am a queen who is just starting hers. Zereya, Ash warned softly. He killed my mother, Zereya said, her voice devoid of tremor. And he called it duty. This is my duty. She didn't hesitate. She didn't offer a speech. She aimed and fired. The bolt struck the spy master in the chest. He collapsed, the light in his cybernetic eyes fading to black. Silence descended on the plaza. The sun was setting now. The sky was a bruised purple, mirroring the energy that had wreathed the tank. Smoke from the burning fleet in the upper atmosphere created a haze that turned the light blood red. The Vayari army was shattered. The ships were falling from the sky like burning leaves. The invasion was over before it had begun. Ash walked over to Zereya. She was staring at the body of the spy master, her hand still gripping the pistol. She was shaking, just slightly. Ash reached out and gently took the gun from her hand. He holstered it, then he pulled her into him. She collapsed against his chest, burying her face in the dirty, grease-stained fabric of his tank top. She didn't cry. She just breathed. It is done, Ash whispered into her hair. Zereya pulled back and looked at the tank. It sat behind them, battered, scorched, covered in the soot of a dead empire. The rust was glowing in the sunset, looking like dried blood. It was ugly. It was archaic. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She thought of the generals on the viewing deck. She thought of the laughter that had echoed in the court when the ramp had first dropped. She reached out and touched the warm, scarred metal of the hull. They laughed at it, she whispered. Ash followed her gaze. He touched the spot where the dog tags usually rested, then remembered Zereya was wearing them. They aren't laughing anymore, Ash said. Zereya turned to the horizon, where the fires of the wreckage were beginning to look like the first campfires of a new world. No, she said. Now. They are waiting to see what we do next. The smoke from the burning capital did not clear for 3 days. It hung over the jagged skyline of the Vayari High Palace like a shroud, a gray memorial to the regime that had finally eaten itself. The floating city, once a jewel of untouchable power, was now listing slightly to the west, its gravity stabilizers whining in protest against the damage sustained during the fleet's destruction. In the ruins of the Grand Plaza, beneath the shadow of a shattered statue of her father, Princess Zereya stood watching the horizon. She was no longer wearing the black combat armor, nor the silks of the court. She wore a simple gray tunic scavenged from the barracks, her hair tied back with a strip of leather, She looked less like royalty and more like a survivor. Ash Weller was checking the treads of the tank. The machine was a wreck. The armor was scorched black. The main barrel was warped from the heat of the phase beam, and the engine was coughing a wet, rattling rhythm that sounded like a death rattle. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to her. He didn't limp as much as he used to. The frantic energy of the battle had burned out, leaving a quiet, hollow exhaustion. "The perimeter is secure," Ash said, his voice low. "The Royal Guard has surrendered. The surviving admirals are fleeing to the rim systems. You are safe. Zereya." Zereya turned to look at him. The dog tags around her neck caught the dull light of the overcast sun. "Safe is a dangerous word, Ash. The vacuum of power is already drawing in the vultures. The outer houses will not accept a truce. They will see this as an opportunity to carve the Dominion apart. That is why we leave," Ash said. He gestured to the north, where the few remaining functional spaceports were located. "I secured a transport, a heavy freighter. It can carry the tank. We can be in the jump gates by midnight. We go to Earth, or we go deep, where no one can find us." Zereya looked at the transport coordinates on his datapad. It was a ticket to freedom. It was a life where she didn't have to be a monument to her father's sins. She could just be Zereya. She could be with him. She looked back at the city. She saw the smoke rising from the lower districts. She saw the civilians emerging from the shelters, looking up at the sky with terrified, confused eyes. They were waiting for orders. They were waiting for someone to tell them if they were going to live or die. "I cannot go," Zereya whispered. Ash went still. He didn't argue immediately. He just watched her, his flinty eyes narrowing slightly. "If you stay, they will try to kill you, the loyalists, the warlords. You become the target." "If I go," Zereya said, stepping closer to him, "then everything we did yesterday was just murder. If I leave, the chaos consumes them. The warlords will burn this world down fighting for the scraps. I am the only one who holds the seal. I am the only one who knows the truth about the uplift." She reached out and took his hand. His knuckles were bruised, the skin rough against hers. "I have to finish it, Ash. I have to dismantle the machine my father built. I cannot do that from a farm on Earth." Ash looked at their joined hands. He let out a long, ragged breath and looked up at the broken palace towers. "I knew you were going to say that. You are too much like her. Your mother. Is that a bad thing?" "It is a hard thing," Ash said. He squeezed her hand, then slowly pulled away. "I can't stay, Zereya. I can't be a diplomat. I can't sit in council meetings and pretend I didn't burn their fleets. I am a weapon. And right now, you need to build a plow, not a sword." Zereya felt a sharp, physical pain in her chest, tighter than any corset she had ever worn. "So this is it? You leave, and I stay?" "I am not leaving the fight," Ash said. He looked toward the tank. "The outer houses are going to come for you. The pirates, the remnant fleets. They are going to try to circle the wagons. I'm going to go out there and make sure they never get close enough to this city to hurt you." "You will be alone," Zereya said, her voice trembling. "I have the ghosts," Ash said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "And now, I have you, even if you aren't there." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small encrypted data chip. He pressed it into her palm. "Frequency code," he said. "Old Terran military band, low bandwidth, hard to trace. If you need me, if the walls start closing in, you broadcast on this. I'll hear it." Zereya closed her fingers around the chip. It felt heavy. She wanted to beg him to stay. She wanted to order him, as a queen, to remain by her side. But she knew that a wolf could not live in a palace, and a queen could not live in a tank. "Come back to me," she commanded softly. "When the work is done, come back." Ash leaned down. He kissed her, not with the desperate hunger of the vault, but with a slow, searing promise. It was a kiss of goodbye, tasting of salt and smoke. "Keep your head down, princess," he whispered against her lips. He turned and walked back to the tank. He climbed onto the hull, dropped into the hatch, and sealed it. The engine roared to life, a defiant, broken sound. The tank turned, its tracks grinding the debris of the plaza into dust, and rolled toward the transport lifts. Zireya stood alone in the ruin of her father's empire, clutching the data chip until it cut into her skin, watching the only man who had ever truly seen her disappear into the gray fog. The first month was the hardest. The Veyari Dominion did not die quietly. It thrashed. The governors of the Three Moons declared independence and blockaded the trade routes. The food riots in the lower city turned violent. Zireya slept 4 hours a night, usually in the war room, surrounded by advisors she didn't trust and maps that bled red ink. She didn't wear a crown. She wore her black armor. She walked the streets of the capital without guards, speaking to the workers, organizing the distribution of nutrient paste, and dismantling the secret police networks. She survived 2 assassination attempts, one by poison, which she detected before sipping the tea, one by a sniper, whose shot missed her ear by an inch. She didn't hide. She stood on the balcony the next morning and announced the dissolution of the noble houses. She established the first council of citizens, and every night, before she collapsed into a restless sleep, she sat by the comms array and typed a message to Ghost. "The Southern Brood has agreed to the ceasefire. They were hungry. I traded grain for their heavy weapons. I feel like a merchant. Ash, I am trading survival by the pound. I miss the silence of the vault. Stay safe. Z." The reply came 3 days later. It was a burst of static that resolved into text on her secure pad. "To Sovereign, merchants build worlds. Soldiers just burn them. I found the remnant 7th Fleet hiding in the asteroid belt of Sector 4. They were planning a run at the capital. They aren't planning anything anymore. The engine is holding. The rust is spreading. Keep building. I'll keep sweeping the porch." 6 months passed. The legend began to grow in the cantinas in the spaceports. Travelers spoke of a demon ship that wasn't a ship at all. They spoke of a rusted metal beast that drifted through the vacuum without a hull, appearing on the sensors of pirate raiders just moments before they were obliterated. They called it the Iron Wraith. They called it the ghost in the rust. They said the pilot never spoke. They said the machine screamed when it fired. Zireya heard the stories. She sat in the High Council chamber, now filled with elected representatives from the guilds and the agridomes, and she let the rumors serve her. The fear of the ghost kept the outer systems in line. It bought her time to weave the fractured society back together. She worked herself to the bone. She negotiated treaties with the aquatic clans of the deep sea. She rewrote the education codex to include the true history of the Terran War. She dismantled the torture chambers of the palace and turned them into archives. But the loneliness was a physical weight. It sat in the chair next to her. It lay in the bed beside her. To Ghost, it has been a year. The city is green again. We planted vines in the craters. The people are asking about the war. I told them it is over, but I feel like I am still waiting for the ceasefire whistle. My father's generals are all gone. The galaxy is quiet. Where are you? Z. There was no reply for weeks. Zireya checked the frequency every hour. She feared the worst. She feared the tank had finally given out, that the grief had consumed the machine, or that Ash had finally found a battle he couldn't win. Then, a message came. It was short. To Sovereign, heading home. Meet me where it started. The Silt Flats were no longer a battlefield of mud and blood. The seasons had turned, and the dry season had baked the ground into a cracked golden mosaic. The wreckage of the Vayari invasion army had been cleared away, salvaged for metal to rebuild the city. Only the deep scars in the earth, where the orbital cruisers had crashed, remained as valleys where new wildflowers bloomed in stubborn patches of violet and red. Zaraya stood at the center of the valley. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She wore a long coat of simple wool over her tunic. She was 23 now, but her eyes held the depth of someone who had lived a century. She waited. The sun began to dip toward the jagged horizon, painting the sky in the familiar bruised purples of twilight. It was the same time of day as the slaughter, the same light. She heard the sound first. It wasn't the screaming squeal of rusted tracks. It wasn't the coughing rattle of a dying combustion engine. It was a low, powerful thrum, a hum of perfect, contained energy. She looked up. Breaking through the cloud layer was not a drop pod. It was a landing craft, painted in the neutral gray of the Terran Republic, but bearing the sigil of the Vayari Peace Council on its flank. It touched down 50 yards away, the thrusters kicking up a cloud of golden dust. The ramp descended. Zaraya held her breath. Her hand went to the dog tags at her throat, clutching them so tight the metal bit into her palm. Rolling down the ramp was a tank. It was the same chassis, the same blocky, brutish silhouette of the Terran Mark IV. But the rust was gone. The hull had been stripped, sanded, and refinished in a matte, gunmetal gray. The scars of the plasma burns had not been hidden, but filled with gold, the ancient repair art of kintsugi, making the breaks into something beautiful. The tracks were new, reinforced composite that moved with a silent, deadly grace. The barrel of the main cannon was polished, gleaming in the sunset. It didn't look like a relic. It looked like a guardian. The tank rolled to a stop 10 paces from her. The engine idled, a purr that vibrated in the soles of her boots. The violet light that used to bleed from the cracks was gone, replaced by a steady, warm amber glow from the sensor ports. The commander's hatch hissed open. Ash Weller pulled himself up. He had shaved the grizzled beard, leaving only a shadow of stubble. He wore a clean flight suit, black and utilitarian. He looked healthy. The deep, dark circles under his eyes were gone. The tension that used to hold his shoulders up to his ears had vanished. He swung his legs over the side and hopped down, his boots hitting the earth with a solid thud. He stood there for a moment, looking at her. He looked at the woman who had rebuilt a world with nothing but her will. Zaraya looked at him. She saw the man who had laid down his ghosts so he could pick up his life. There were no speeches. There was no need to declare the war over. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Ash began to walk toward her. Zaraya broke her stillness and ran. They collided in the middle of the field. Ash caught her, lifting her off her feet, and Zaraya buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of him, no longer ozone and blood, but oil, soap, and the open sky. He set her down, but didn't let go. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her forehead resting against his. "You cleaned it," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I had to," Ash murmured, his voice a low rumble against her chest. "I couldn't bring the rust home. It didn't match the new drapes." Zaraya laughed, a sound that bubbled up from her soul, light and free. She pulled back to look at him. "You are late." "Traffic in the asteroid belt," Ash said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "And I had to stop and pick something up." He reached into his flight suit pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He opened it. Inside was a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a piece of the hard light crystal from the shattered shield of the flagship, polished into a perfect, glowing circle. "I'm not a prince," Ash said quietly. "And I'm definitely not a diplomat. I'm just a mechanic with a tank. But if you're still building that new world, I'd like to apply for the job of protecting it." Zaraya looked at the ring, then up at the tank, and finally at the soldier who had crossed the stars to find his way back to the mud. "You are hired," she whispered. She took the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. The sun finally slipped below the horizon, plunging the silt flats into darkness. But they weren't afraid of the dark anymore. Ash took her hand, and together, they turned toward the lights of the city shimmering in the distance. "Ready?" Ash asked. Zaraya squeezed his hand. "Ready?" They walked toward the future, leaving the tank behind them not as a weapon of war but as a monument to the peace that had been forged in the fire.